All right. Got another episode here. Tell me you're joking. Tongue-in-cheek implied. Intended. Rolling in with a little theme song. I'm stealing from Soccer Dad Pod. If you're not familiar, I have three. My number one passion is my family. Sorry, Kim. My other two passions are soccer and politics. 3B is beer. So today, I'm rolling in a song like I do over on Soccer Dad Pod in honor of what I assume will be the theme, part of the theme of our conversation today. War is the band. The song is called Why Can't We Be Friends? Because at some point, we're going to talk about the city and the county. And let's see if there's an opportunity for us to be friends here in the St. Louis metro on a larger scale. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and roll in my guest today. Employed over at the St. Louis University since 2008, specializing in stats, socials, numbers?
Demography, yeah.
Demography. Ness Sándoval. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me.
Appreciate you coming in here. I feel underdressed. You got the bow tie.
Well, I just gave a talk at WashU on this topic.
Oh, you are going way downhill today. God, I hope you've got a nice lunch planned. I appreciate you coming in today. What'd you think of the song choice for our
I love it. I love the song.
Yeah, do you, maybe we start at the end first, and we'll get into details later, but do you think the city and the county will ever be friends?
I think things are changing. There are new leaders, younger leaders, who recognize the sense of urgency to become friends. Part of the talk I gave this morning was on this topic about the city and the county merging. And if there is no merger, it's bad news for the region. I think there's enough people who understand putting politics aside and looking at the future of the region. That future must have a city-county merger.
Well, I tell you what, as I mentioned before we went on the air, I tend to probably do less research than I should, but I do that on purpose because I want these to be fluid conversations. I was intending on talking about this later, but I got to be honest, this is one of the subject matters, the topics within the region for me, trying to be active, trying to be engaged, a lover of the city. I spend probably 90% of what I would call the fun money or discretionary money within the city, from St. Louis City SC to food and beverage and just activations. Live in Webster Groves, so just kind of paint a picture here. Mm-hmm. My kids have been public and private schools both, currently locally, both in public and Webster, and a lot of friends that are city dwellers and will never leave. And I look at it after coming from Chicago, in my what I would call pseudo-formative years, the post-college, first real job, first real paycheck, first real car, all that stuff occurred up north. And the explosion that Chicago is experiencing post-98, through the dot-com years when Lincoln Park early was still dangerous, and now it's not, So I kind of experienced a lot of that and came home, and I've been waiting and waiting and waiting to kind of see a similar trajectory, and it's the city-county merger, or separation, I should say, that just it frustrates me. So let me ask you this, because I just kind of gave you my own, the simplistic, sad story about how I view it. Just 10,000-foot view. When you personally think about the status of the city-county separation, just from an operational standpoint, from an optics standpoint, just from a vibe, how do you view it? How does it make you feel?
So my impression, coming from outside the region, and I've had the opportunity to live throughout the U.S., San Francisco, Chicago, the D.C. area. St. Louis is a very provincial region, but that provincialism needs to be on the sideline as we think about how St. Louis becomes a region and the way that these other regions operate. So it's easier to be said than it to be done. but it has to become if you look at the demographic challenges which we'll talk about, part of the challenge is St. Louis is an independent city, and it's going to have financial challenges because the population is declining. It's losing. It's got the second largest rate of population decline among large cities in the United States, behind San Francisco.
So, well, that's two totally different reasons. It would be my guess based on, my own kind of anecdotal knowledge of it. I want you to take a second though and talk about the independence that you just mentioned that St. Louis has. One of its issues is its independence as it pertains to its financial liabilities, et cetera. Can you kind of take a second and maybe dissect that just a little bit for the listener? Because most people will hear the city's, too independent, or they're thinking in terms of maybe like an emotional, we're an independent, club, or we're an independent household.
Great question. Yeah, I'm not talking about independence in terms of freedom. I'm talking about demographically, the city does not right now and will not have enough workers to support basic city functions as a city county.
Mm-hmm.
And so we already see the decline in services because there aren't enough workers to maintain the streets, to maintain the stop signs, basic city services, and then add on top of that county services.
Yeah.
There aren't enough workers in the city, and it's trying to draw from the suburbs now. But the suburbs, St. Louis County, is having similar demographic challenges. And so you cannot do this alone. You need to come together. And demographically speaking, the city and county have already merged. People cross that border every single day. Every single day, people move in and out of the city and the county.
For work, for food, for entertainment.
For just households. They just move 2 miles into the county or come 2 miles into the city.
Yeah.
So demographically, on a day-to-day basis, the city and county are already merged economically.
So then really what's happening is people are just kind of changing their fiefdoms to a degree.
Yep.
Because as they go 2 miles in any direction, well, as long as it's outside the city limits, and then let's say 2, 3, 4 years later, they go another 2 miles, west or north or south. What they're really changing is school district, the color of their cop cars, just the basic services.
But it's actually deeper than that, because then you are changing different roles. So if you go to St. Louis County, mm-hmm. you have a plethora of municipalities that have different rules in terms of zoning, in terms of permits. Mm-hmm. And so you could be in Webster Groves, and these are the rules that apply to you if you want to redo a bathroom.
Right.
And I live in Chesterfield. You come to Chesterfield, you could be the same company, but you'll have two separate set of rules.
Yeah,
that you'll have to apply to for the same municipality in the same county.
Well, I mean, I mentioned to you offline, a little bit of my background. Spent 15 years in building renovation and as well as new construction, and right around 08, 09, when everything blew up, we did our strategic decision to keep the construction company going. Seemed kind of counterintuitive to the market, but we decided to go up market. We were like, well, rich people are recession proof, and we got into green construction. And part of the process was trying to figure out which muni. I mean, we knew who was, quote, rich, mm-hmm. But then there's a big difference between finding somebody that can pay for it and wants to do it, because there's a lot of those people, and finding a municipality that is willing to work with you.
Yep.
And St. Louis County is what, 87? Roughly?
I think it's a little bit higher than that, like it's in the 90s. But yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Okay, so just in your experience and in your research, because I know inevitably you have to do a lot of compare and contrast. Yeah. When just statistically, from a structural standpoint, what are other regions that currently today you use as, okay, here's our sister city, good, bad, and different. Structurally, they look a lot like us. Who are we looking like operationally?
So it's a handful because you take it municipalities per population. So you can go to Chicago County. I used to live in Chicago. There are a lot of municipalities
Yeah.
there, but per population, we outnumber the Chicago area in terms of municipalities. And so municipalities themselves are not bad if you have a density of people living in the area. But when you have a municipality that has 1,000 people,
Right.
you got to question its existence. I gave a talk this morning where I talked about St. George. Most people have no idea where.
I know you.
Oh, do you know? Okay.
Yeah. I'm kind of a nerd about these little weird places. Like,
Okay.
how do you like population 7? You know, it's ironic to me.
And so part of this, whatever we think about merging together, we call it One St. Louis. It's a different movement than Better Together. But in the vision of One St. Louis, it is not only about a city-county that's united, but it's about reimagining municipalities that are thriving, municipalities that are struggling, and how to bring these municipalities together in a unified way.
So okay, so let's do this then. Let's do a part B to kind of that last portion, this striving versus struggling. Give me an example, maybe one or two that are on the top side that might not be the usual suspects. You know, obviously people are going to think, oh, he's going to say Chesterfield. But what are some of the municipalities within St. Louis County that are thriving in your view, but maybe due to some unique management or development ideas, or even if it's a cultural idea that maybe stands outside of just a bar chart?
So some municipalities that stand out demographically because they're benefiting from demographic trends is Olivet's one example. Olivet happens to be in an interesting location because it has access to the Ladue public school system.
Yep.
And so as people leave the city, one of the primary factors in the calculus of moving is schools. And people are trying to get to Olivet because they want access to the Ladue public school system.
Yeah.
And so Olivet is benefiting from the demand from people around the region who can't live in the city for a variety of reasons, or are looking to leave St. Charles. There's this demand for Olivet. And they're like, what's the problem? Our city's doing good. There's great demand, housing. And that's exactly. But if you didn't have access to the Ladue public school system and you had to go to a different public school system, that demand would go away.
So, okay, so within the St. Louis metropolitan area, I mean, well, really on a national scale, education, public education in particular, is an extreme hot topic. It's been that for a long time in St. Louis. And St. Louis is, having traveled a lot and have a lot of friends that are in other marketplaces. St. Louis is one of those, the whole what high school did you go to thing. That's kind of kitschy. It's almost like our T-RAV exposure. But I think that the percentage and the utilization of private schools, and, we're talking multi-generations of families that I am a St. Joe family. My mom's a St. Joe girl, and, dad and his brothers and dad all went to SLU High. And, in these communities like where I live now, Webster, you can go to any given block in any one of those, Webster, Kirkwood, Richmond Heights, et cetera. And if you have 10 kids, you're going to have maybe 5 or 6 that are going to public school, and the other half are divided up amongst, whatever their legacy private schools are.
Yep.
So you have that additional layer of competition within the market. Or maybe it's not. Well, here's where I'm going with this. Most people do choose to move outside of a certain region once they have kids for educational purposes, right? School districts or affordability.
Yep.
Since St. Louis has such a volume of private schools, what would you say is, let's take education out of the mix because of that, because it's a little skewed.
But it's changing. And so part of what I talk about is
Going back to our public?
that these private schools are closing because the number of children that are in these private schools is in decline. And so the region only grew by 300,000 residents since 1970.
That's not good.
In 50 years, it added 300,000, the 15-county region.
Well, but put that in perspective, though. Okay, so if we're 1.2 million or whatever the number is for the city, county,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so give us an idea of other metros that are roughly in that demo number. And if you know offhand, if we added 300,000 over...
Well, that's the 15-county MSA. So St. Louis County is smaller today than it was in 1990.
Okay, so but St. Charles County and Madison County...
But they're not that much larger. Yeah.
So give us another region, though. Like if we're at 300,000 for the whole MSA...
2.8 million.
Okay.
So our pair cities, we wrote this paper in 2018 and said that this was going to happen, that Orlando and Charlotte were going to be larger than St. Louis in 2023, and that happened. And it's not difficult to predict this. Charlotte was in 1970 about 450,000 residents
For the whole MSA?
Yes,
That's crazy.
and it just surpassed St. Louis. Orlando was the same size, a little bit larger, like 500,000. It just became larger than St. Louis region. Austin was the same. Austin was a little bit smaller in 1970. It's going to be larger than the St. Louis metropolitan region. San Antonio is going to be larger. And so we are going to be past. These are demographic facts. San Antonio is going to be larger than St. Louis here in the next year to 18 months. And then it's going to be Austin. And then we sit back and wait. And we say, is it going to be Indianapolis? Is it going to be Nashville? Is it going to be Kansas City, Las Vegas, Sacramento?
Let me ask you about Charlotte and Austin in particular, because when I think of those two cities and kind of, throughout my own career, my own peer groups, and the things that have been going on in those two cities, when I think of Charlotte, I think of the finance industry.
Yes.
The amount of banks that have gone there and financial institutions, which by default, okay, if they're gaining, who's losing? Well, who's big financial markets? Well, that's Chicago, that's New York, that et cetera. It makes sense. Cost of living's a lot lower, so finance grew in Charlotte. And I don't know what the attracting factors were, but banks are the big deal there. Austin is kind of like, if you think of sister cities. I was just talking about this with Dave Messner yesterday, and he's right, and I agree with him. Silicon Valley, San Francisco, kind of that tech, that cool, vibey tech vibe. Austin's become that, and Austin obviously has UT right there too. So they have things that kind of, I would have to believe that you believe are kind of the spine or maybe the magnet, maybe core industry. So when you think of St. Louis, then this minuscule growth over the same period of time, do you, just from an industry perspective, which of our industries didn't do what it was supposed to do, or maybe what you thought or hoped it could have done?
I'll say it's downtown. The downtown as a whole,
Just a region.
just failed. I was Charlotte last year. And I was amazed by the pedestrian activity in downtown. At 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, the streets are packed with people walking around. They make a commitment to having police officers on the street.
Yeah.
You cannot go more than 2 to 3 minutes without seeing a police officer. That's not what's happening in St. Louis.
No.
I can go hours in downtown and not see a police officer. In fact, I take my oldest son. He was learning how to drive, so we would go downtown because I'm like, there's no traffic.
Streets are, oh man.
And you can learn how to parallel
There's
park.
a bad soundbite.
You
Don't worry, candidates. I'm not going to put that one out there.
You can parallel park without any stress. But we would go down there as a demographer. I'm like, okay, I'm going to count how many police officers will we see while we're downtown for 2.5 hours. We only saw police officers when we got by a Blues game.
Oh yeah, well, yeah.
That was it. There were no other police officers to be seen. And I'm like, this would not happen in Charlotte. It's not happening in Chicago. It's not happening in Austin.
Well, I mentioned my son. My oldest is a sophomore in college. He's at Belmont in Nashville.
yeah.
So, we go down there often. To your point, one of the things I noticed, other than the $9 Miller Lights, are the cameras and the cops. Every corner, and every other street has a mounted police officer. It's almost like it's part of the landscape.
Yep. And so this has to change, because this is what the expectation is. Because people do want to go downtown. People do want. It is a form of entertainment to go to the baseball game and stay there, to spend money at the bars and interact.
So I think of a lot of things in terms of like an economic analysis, as far as like, if it's a particular factor or an item, is it a leading indicator? Is it a lagging indicator? When you think of police presence in crime or reduction in crime, is it how do you view it from a chicken or the egg standpoint? Because do we have demand to go downtown from businesses for cheap rent and cheap housing and all that stuff? And then once that demand is met, well, then, we increase our police presence. Or do you view it as I do, that if you're not safe, nobody's coming?
Yeah, I think I think part of it's the perception that people's perception of crime in the city has not changed. Even though crime is coming down, it is still too high. For a city of 279,000 residents now. So part of what I suggest, and I think here's the demographic challenge. I'm not sure that there are enough police officers sitting on the sideline waiting to come back into the city to work.
Is that in your opinion, is that the vibe or a culture issue, or is it a pay issue? Is it just a lack of respect issue? Is it a political divide issue?
I think it's a demographic issue, that there are so many police officers retiring today that the younger generation is not there to replace retired police officers. So this decline that we've seen, part of it was a demographic of people leaving the workforce to retire, and there weren't enough new recruits coming in to offset it. So regardless of who's mayor, I don't think you're going to see tremendous change in. So the municipalities are having trouble.
So a couple episodes back, a little while back, good friend of mine, I grew up in Granite City.
Yep.
Okay, so 2 episodes in a row, I had 2 individuals that were both police officers for a long time. One is now the mayor of Granite City, Mike Parkinson, and then I had Nick Novasic, who is now the coroner of Madison County, who was the chief of police right before he left, there in Granite City. And we had a specific conversation about pro-police optics and kind of the roller coaster over the past 30, 35 years in particular, starting with LA riots, bad, they're beating people. And then here comes 9/11. Now they're top of the mountain. Everybody loves first responders, cops and firemen, et cetera. And here comes the Iraq-Afghanistan war afterwards, which floods the zone with all of these individuals that, went into the military, went over, fought this endless war, right, and come home, and a lot of them went into the police forces around the country. So it seemed as if it was like filling the pipe. But you're saying now, you have a lot of retirees exiting out, and we're 20 years plus past that 9/11 bump, so to speak. What do you think is contributing to the lack of interest at this point? I mean, I think some of it's probably obvious, but how do you view it?
Part of it's pay, part of it's prestige. Part of it, there's just not enough people to fill all these occupations. The U.S. military view this as a national security concern because they themselves do not have enough high school students entering into the military, because the number of babies born have declined since 2007.
Well, how do you true that though with kind of the modern warfare? We even if we go back to maybe the Vietnam era, in which boots on ground and the necessity of bodies and volume, et cetera, and I memes and gifs all over the place show, one drone equals 1,000, enrollees, right? The state of war is changing technologically, primarily, theoretically reducing the number of quote soldiers that you need. But when it comes to police forces, domestic police forces, I don't see tech that can mitigate the demand.
Yep.
How do you separate between the two, outside of just pay them more?
Part of it is trying to figure out among the high school students if this is going to be a career that they want, and then looking at the bar. So, are you going to have to go get a 4-year college degree to be a police officer? Right? Do you need this bachelor's degree, or are there going to be other type of training programs to get? And we're going to have this discussion at the national level, not just for police officers, but because of the declining fertility rate in the U.S., we need to question everything about how we're training for different types of occupations. I'll give you one example: lawyers. If we would follow our peers in Europe, they do not go get an undergraduate degree to become a lawyer. They go straight to law school right after high school.
So more of like Germany has the track schooling, technical.
And so these are going to be questions for students like, do you need to go get yourself in debt $100,000 for an undergrad degree simply to go to law school to get in more debt? Or are you going to start to see law schools say you do not need an undergrad? We're going to admit you directly into the law program. You're already starting to see at universities, they have a 3-2 program, 3 years undergrad, 2 years graduate school.
Yep.
So there's nothing magical about a 4-year degree anymore, right? So the universities that start to break from this 4-year structure and have the freedom and say, we're going to offer, some schools are offering a 4-3, 2 degrees with the master's. And so you're going to start to see schools doing different things to get enrollment to continue to be constant, because we just have fewer children entering into the college system today than we did 20 years ago.
Well, higher education is going to be taking it on a chin for a while. I mean, I have a kid in the mix right now and 2 more coming up the pipe. Number one, it's cost prohibitive,
Yep.
period, full stops. And number 2 is C number 1. Number 3 is C number 1. But outside of that, I think in terms of kind of technology and gig economy, so everything from, no disrespect to Uber or Grubhub or whatever, these are just services, it's gig economy. But then you have kind of the seedier side of OnlyFans and, the crazy stuff, digital and web. And then you have crypto markets and all these things, right? That if you have a kid or an individual with a little bit of drive and a little bit of creativity and knows how to use ChatGPT and YouTube to do a little bit of research, to a degree, what we're seeing is an explosion of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So, and it feels like higher education is just not paying attention to that at all.
No, we're very slow to change. I teach, we have a summer camp for middle school and high school children. And I'm astounded when I see these kids come into my summer program, because we're trying to be rigorous and push them. They already know C++ programming.
Yeah.
Like they are more advanced than I am when I was starting my career.
Yeah.
They're writing apps for the iPhone in 9th grade, 10th grade. And so we have to understand how creative and how innovative these middle school kids are, these high school kids. And so I, as a professor, I'm very critical. I'm like, they do not have to come to SLU.
Yeah.
They can go straight into the workforce based on some of the skills that they have. And so we have to adapt. I have a chart on my LinkedIn page that shows the trends for major universities in Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only a couple, but most of the trend is downward, to the point where there's about 6 universities that will probably not be around in 2040.
Mizzou, University of Missouri, where are they on that chart?
They're the state universities, so they're going to be okay, but it's...
I figured. Let's talk about University of Missouri from a demographic standpoint and maybe an attraction standpoint. We just talked about a little earlier Charlotte and Austin, some of the the fundamental factors that probably led to their growth. We didn't even get into state taxes or things like that, right? That's that's in the weeds. University of Missouri, in your opinion, why do you think it's thriving from a population standpoint?
Well, it's recruiting. Um, it's being creative in terms of how it recruits students, but it's being challenged by other state schools. So I'll just give you an example. So Kansas, the schools in Kansas have what's called a Missouri match.
Mm-hmm.
And so now Missouri students can go to Kansas schools as in-state tuition.
So
And then
smart.
the Missouri match, then for those students in engineering, they match the tuition offer from Columbia. And then they put $5,000 on top of it
Just as an incentive.
to get to, because Kansas itself is having trouble. And so like, well, we're going to pull from Missouri. And Missouri students, if your sole interest is about tuition, you could go to Kansas for $40,000 cheaper.
Well, isn't Arkansas in the mix too?
Arkansas is doing it. Ole Miss, Kentucky, Tennessee, all of these schools are in our backyard as I speak, heavily recruiting our students out.
So each of these schools, though, like, how much does the SEC and the big sports play in those schools in particular? Because when I think of these schools historically, when we think about like, the Gen X generation down a little bit, when you think of an institution, you did still think about like the academic pathway or what it was known for, the flag. My kids, when they hear Arkansas, or they're thinking of SEC football.
Yep.
Like it is all about the sports.
It is about the 4-year. It's about the football and basketball.
Because the revenue generation is just off the charts nowadays.
Yeah, but demographically, these states are in trouble.
Yeah.
Arkansas, Ole Miss, Alabama, they have the same challenges that Missouri has. And so they have to go out and recruit to maintain their student level, to maintain the structures of their universities. Otherwise, they're closing schools in the same way Missouri is going to be closing schools. This is not going to go away. In the state of Missouri, we have more people dying than are born. And so 20 years from now, the situation is going to be more difficult. And so this is why I think Missouri will be okay because it's a state school, but Truman State may not be around in 2040. Most likely will not be around in 2040.
So let's bring this back around full circle, back to the city of St. Louis. We're looking at yet more continued population drop.
Yep.
There was an article the other day that said if not for the 30,000 immigrants into the marketplace, then we would have seen more of a drop. And then obviously in today's political landscape, everybody's like, nobody wants new people, period. So we're looking at this compounding factor. And comparing and contrasting it to the school, the college, university landscape, some of these schools that are on the death march, it feels like the city of St. Louis is, really the St. Louis region, from what you're saying, is, maybe not on life support, but approaching the wrong wing of the hospital. I'm going to ask you to scoot out again to that 10,000-foot view. What are some of the factors that you think are just the primarily attributing to this stagnation, stagflation, and reduction?
Probably the biggest factor that I would say is that, let me put it like this. The region only grew by 300,000 residents from 1970 to 2020. So if you grew up in St. Louis during that time frame, you did not experience any serious growth. And so you'd think, well, this is how it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Other metropolitan regions grew. We as a region do not understand what growth is. So what happened over those 50 years is not the type of growth that happened across other regions.
Okay.
And so people are afraid of growth.
That's a huge point. You just kind of made me have my own personal aha moment. I was born in 75, right?
Yep.
So I've kind of been part of this exact generation. Moved back here from Chicago when I was 29, 30. What I've experienced, and maybe you can speak to this, within my circles, I haven't looked at the region from a growth perspective, from a macro numbers, comparing St. Louis to other markets. But within my circles, I have friends and networks and other soccer parents, et cetera, in which I've seen wealth accumulation. I've seen individual growth. I've seen property owners buying more properties, and I've seen business owners growing their businesses and some selling them. So like we've seen success through markets in a manageable market, because St. Louis is, it's not easy to make money anywhere, but St. Louis is a city where you can make money. So seeing that, like, you have success stories, but as a whole, we're not keeping pace as a region. How do you view that, getting over that? Because a lot of people that are opposed to any type of city county conversation, and there's a lot of stigma that goes along with that, because some of the people I know that are opposed to it, they're very successful.
Yeah. There are success stories. My point is, I can put a map together, and the number one reason that I see the challenge for the region is housing. We are ranked 47th in the country in new housing permits. We're going to be out of the top 50 pretty soon, because we are saying no to housing. Webster Groves voted down housing. Kirkwood voted down housing. The city of St. Louis keeps voting down housing. Mm-hmm. Chesterfield is in the big debate. Town and Country, St. Charles, Jefferson County. It's all over the region where we're saying not in my backyard, because for 50 years, we've been saying we don't want this type of housing.
What would you say the breakdown, though, is in that NIMBY, that not in my backyard attitude? Do you think the main deterrent is boomer generation? They've got
it is boomers. It is primarily driven by boomers. Creve Coeur is going through this debate of what to do with the Bear plant. It shouldn't be a debate. The mayor came out and spoke and said, we need new housing for families. Chesterfield's got this redevelopment of the mall. It's not a debate. Build housing.
Yeah.
Town and Country's got land. Build housing. North St. Louis has got land. We can build housing. St. Charles has got tremendous land. It can build housing. It voted down a 550 units single-family home because it's like, we don't want any more housing. I can look out here. There should be cranes out here. Right? There should be cranes.
Yeah, right out these windows.
Right out these windows. The city itself should have 700,000 people. We're 279, and it's going to continue to decline, because the number one demographic group that's leaving the city are families with children. About 90 a month, every month, 90 families with children exit the city. Talking
about housing and demand, I think the city is one of those weird anomalies, because having worked in, on a micro scale with my own business and with other partners, working on the, the 2-family to single-family renovation, or the 2-family reno, and it's, anything from 1 to 4 units in South City, from Tower Grove to Benton Park, Cherokee, et cetera. I've worked in all the neighborhoods. And what's astounded me over the past 5 years in particular are these macro apartment towers. What by macro, I mean anything more than 3 stories high. And they have a whole bunch of glass and, whatever modern architecture on the outside. Here's what amazes me: the rent rates and or the purchase prices and the occupancy rates. That younger millennial generation and Gen Zs that are now moving into kind of first earning years, they don't care. They are filling these places. Like the demand, it's field of dreams. If you build it, they will come, right? Yep. And it seems kind of just obvious to me. Like you come into the city, everybody wants to talk about City Park, they want to talk about a restaurant or whatever. But if you really pay attention to, like down in Soulard, 2 huge apartment buildings, full capacity. So where's the disconnect? Why, let's take boomers out of the equation. Let's talk about municipalities. I can speak on Webster's behalf, but the city of St. Louis in particular, there are a lot of hurdles to get projects off the ground that will bring people into market.
Yep.
Why?
So I gave a talk to developers about 6 months ago, to local small developers, and part of the it was just listening to them talking about their struggles, the time it took to get permits.
Oh my God.
And then I just spoke to a developer last week that decided not to develop because there was no insurance from the city that their plan would be approved, but they were going to have to lay out close to $1 million in the site development plan.
On a bond? Like to bond the
But
project?
there was no proof that they were going to get it approved. Like, if you cannot guarantee this, then you have bigger challenges as a city to understand the sensitivity of the market. People want to develop in the city. The city has so many regulations. And then part of it is the earnings tax. I mean, you got to put it on the table and saying how much of this is keeping people on the sidelines. I've talked to several people in the development industry. Like, if they have to rely on subcontracts from the county, it's not reliable because then those people are going to have to pay the earnings tax.
The 1%? Yep.
And so it is keeping some contractors out of the city that are trying to, for a big developer, they have to rely on labor from the county.
Yeah, it's like the anti-abatement debate. I always found that really funny. And out of principle, I was in Lewis Reed's district on a lot of projects. Never took an abatement. Was offered 5s and 10s on a number of projects. Just didn't do it. It was like something about it. And frankly, I didn't want to fill out the paperwork. That was a big part of it. But the people that are anti-abatement, and when that kills a project, it's, what's 100% of a grape or 10% of a watermelon kind of argument. And I'm thinking in terms of this, the contractor hesitancy. Look, I mean, these general contractors are smart. If they know the city tax is, going to apply, if you go from 12.5 points on your margin, now you're at 13.5 points, to a degree, there's ways to do it. But it's just the optics of a hurdle that seems unnecessary. Why wouldn't there just be, hey, let's create a quid pro quo? If you're a county contractor and you're going to build a 100-unit apartment building, how about we waive the 1% on your people? Because if you do bring people into these new people, well, they're working here or they're living here. They're paying. Yep. They're paying 1%.
So that's one example. So this is part of this one St. Louis.
Yeah.
Where the city would not have to rely on an earnings tax anymore. That there would be different revenue sources to come in and support the city. So this is a bigger vision. This is a bigger movement. And it's being led by different people. Mm-hmm. And so I think the younger population realizes that.
What's the primary difference of One St. Louis compared to Better Together?
I think Better Together was driven by ideology.
Okay.
It was driven by privatization of some services. One St. Louis is, I think it's more organic. There's not a billionaire behind this. It's just people who have moved here, there's some native born residents, but a lot of young people have moved here and saying, St. Louis is a great city. It's a great region. But some of the things that are happening here have to change. And this discussion is happening in Cincinnati. Cincinnati's got a younger population that's changing it. The city itself should not be 279 residents. It should be 400,000 residents. It's getting to the point where the population is too small to provide services and to function as, going back to our beginning of our discussion.
Yeah.
It doesn't, part of the complaint of the snowstorm was the city did not have enough workers to work 24 hours a day. It just didn't have enough work. This was not a bad storm. No. The truck should have been going 24 hours a day, but it couldn't.
How come nobody said that?
I think people did kind of acknowledge this, but didn't want to admit it.
Yeah, after the fact. Yeah, 2 weeks later, like, oh, poll numbers are dropping.
Yeah.
Wait a second,
we're going to try to clean the streets with one 12-hour shifts.
Yeah.
Because we don't have enough workers to run those trucks 24 hours.
let me ask you.
And it's just 2 weeks. You just have to do it for 5-7 days. But if you don't have that many workers, and the state had the same problem. The state highways, they were short 200 workers for that period, and so that's why the state highways were in bad shape.
So let's do a quick compare contrast. Let's talk about maybe the three states that come to mind obviously are Texas, Tennessee, and Florida with no state income tax. They clearly are opposed to regulation in general, or there's low bars to get over. And we were just talking about City of St. Louis itself has not only building regulations, but it also has the 1% earnings tax, kind of going in the other direction. The Missouri legislature is supermajority Republican at this time. They're kicking around ideas of eliminating personal property and eliminating state income and all these typical Republican mantras at this point. Like, we're going to get rid of all taxation. When you hear that and you're looking at the numbers, you're looking at the population, you're looking at maybe GDP output from a more broader perspective, not just City of St. Louis, not just St. Louis County, but maybe Missouri in a broader sense. And then you look at the industries that are thriving here. As you start to put all these ingredients in the pot and you're thinking of what is this soup going to, is this soup going to go bad or is it actually going to turn out? Where do you put us? Like, if you were to grade Missouri and these ideas in an attempt to compete with these theoretical states that are, quote, doing well, where are we in your opinion?
I think this would be a nightmare for the state to do this. And I'll tell you why. Because we see this in counties that are struggling with their budgets. Just go to St. Charles County. It's a growing county. Mm-hmm. The fastest growing county in our region. It is having budget problems today. And so you're going to ask one of the fastest counties to give up its property tax base, to give up its personal property taxes. And by the way, St. Charles County passed a senior tax freeze.
So all the baby boomers.
Yeah, so baby boomers are going to be fine, but you and I, our property taxes are, whatever they decide to do, if it's a sales tax. And then if you rely on the sales tax in an aging state, as you get older, you do not buy things.
No, that's straight inflation.
Right? And so you cannot rely on sales tax as a way to budget your budget.
Or subsidize it, like, say, in the case of, what would be a good example? Dallas, tolls, your roads, things like that. We don't have things that you can activate as use tax.
And I've seen this debate with Texas and Florida, and then I go to Texas and Florida, and Florida's got tourism.
Right.
Where is our tourism numbers to generate that lost revenue? It's not there. Texas has the natural resources. What natural resources does Missouri bring to the table?
In both of those cases, we have the Ozarks, but that's filmed in Georgia.
Yeah. But we don't have those resources that these other two states have to offset the loss of revenues. We're an aging state. And so it's going to create a budget disaster. If St. Charles is already having trouble, imagine what the other counties are going to struggle with.
Okay, so as an individual that stares at the numbers all day, every day, when in regards to what we're talking about right now, the trajectory of the potential fallout. The argument on their side is if you give all the money back, you're going to spur spending, you're going to spur GDP, you're going to grow out of your headache.
This is not going to happen. I'll tell you what. We already have some evidence of seniors leaving St. Louis County and moving to St. Charles County, partly because of that senior tax break. People are rational actors, and if you have a tax break that's not means tested, people are going to go there because my property taxes are going to be frozen. I tell people, I'll just use my own life. When my wife and I live in Chesterfield, so when we retire, the rational action is to move to St. Charles, buy the house with equity in cash, and have my property taxes frozen and not have to have every year $1,000 increase in my property tax.
And the irony of that is you will then be a burden on St. Charles County from a services perspective, but you are a zero contributor.
Yep. And why would I not do this?
Yeah.
Why would I not move to St. Charles County when I retire? If they're not going to means test me.
So where's the disconnect? Because you're talking to a lot of groups and panels and other university likes. You're talking to industry. Are you sitting at the table with representatives, elected representatives, and maybe policy creators? Why is this story not resonating with the people that are attempting to write this legislation? Where's the disconnect?
I do talk to a lot of elected leaders, both Republicans. I actually talk to more Republicans than I do Democrats, to be honest with you.
Well, you're in Missouri.
Okay.
There we go.
They've shown more concern on average than Democrats about this issue. But in election season, it doesn't matter. So we're in an election year. We just it didn't matter because you have talking points you have to maintain. But in the off cycle, you have people who are concerned. You have people, especially when you get outside. We have, is it 87 or 80? It's on my LinkedIn page. Counties that have more people dying than are born in Missouri today. It's about 87.
Okay.
So if you're outside of the St. Louis region, you live in a county that's already downhill, and it's not going to come back. And so these representatives, when they see me, they're like, "Oh yeah, we want you to come and testify." They encourage me to come and testify at their panels because I'm just sharing. I typically just share the raw data. I give all my data is publicly available. Mm-hmm. In the end, I'm like, you have to come to a conclusion on your own. I'm not gonna force you. My job is not to be an evangelist and convert you. You have to convert yourself.
Are you seeing more barriers to acceptance or understanding of data like this from yourself, from other individuals, fellow peers that are maybe coming from academia or think tanks? Are you seeing a greater barrier of acceptance as it pertains to just kind of the political rhetoric that we're living in within now, because everybody believes everything is hashtag fake news, right?
Yeah.
You even though you're not media, you are pure academia.
Yeah.
You're still just really a statistician, pulling the data. Are you seeing, given at this point in your career, is this the highest level of resistance that you've felt to your data? And do you attribute it to just kind of the general political landscape that we're living in?
I think it's the general landscape I'm living in. But I will say this: I do receive some pushback that I'm too transparent with the data.
Oh, who's pushing back?
I've just received pushback that not everybody needs to see everything because I show the raw. I've told people that data in my office does no good being in my office. It needs to be out. So people have a hard time hearing. Some people have a hard time hearing that more people are dying than are born in our region.
Well, here's because when
I show it, and this is just beginning.
Well, so this is where I love poking the bear. It's a bad habit. I tend to entertain myself by going on socials and trying to be the contrarian. Normally comes off pretty arrogant. But to your point, hearing you say this in multiple contexts today, that more people are dying than being born, or that are moving out than are moving in, the dying part of it, I immediately envision these, readily accessible charts when you overlap like life expectancy. Forget about the volume of people that are dying that are more than those that are being born. Within the state of Missouri, you can go to any one of the Republican districts, and people are not only are they dying, but they're dying at a younger age. Like life expectancy is dropping. So there's a lot of other factors going on there. When you see it all, like if you had the superpower to throw out a singular safety net to say, "Hey, let's slow this down. Here's an idea." Where would one start if they were in the policy world to address this?
So I've said this, So let me go back to your point. So people who write a paycheck every week love my data. Who are struggling to hire qualified workers, they're like, "Ness, tell the story because I have this challenge every week."
Industry.
They see it. I'm giving a talk on Thursday to HR managers across the country because they are all encountering this problem of a declining workforce. So one of the discussions we had at WashU this morning was we probably need to have free childcare to address part of this decline in fertility. Now we live in a Republican state, but this policy solution will go nowhere in Missouri.
Right.
This should be the number one policy solution in a state like Missouri that says it's pro-life. Like, okay, all of births are going to be subsidized then.
Oh my God. That's Pandora's box. We got to be careful here, but I'm with you.
Yeah.
We're pro-birth.
Pro-life, because you're pro-life from birth to the end of life. So that you don't just stop when the baby's born.
Well, funding does in Missouri, though.
Well, I know. That's why I'm saying you have to invest all along the life course of that individual. And so it's something simple like that. But to have those discussions at the state level, like, oh, we cannot do that. This is personal responsibility. People have to take, they need to be responsible for bringing children into the world. But you see what's happening in Missouri.
Yeah.
You can see the decline in fertility because the younger population is burdened with debt, precisely because the state is retracting from tuition. And so the students are coming out of the state college system with 6 figures in loans. Mm-hmm. That should not happen at a state college. I
had an anecdotal conversation with I'm going to say person A. I don't want to out them, but they're in my world. They are a boomer, and they were just kind of espousing on their they just don't understand why young people aren't, why they don't have the families and why they're not more nuclear. And, and I said to the individual, I'm like, they can't afford it. Like, this isn't one of those things where they're anti-kids. They're just realistic with the environment, whether it's their college debt, whether it's current rent rates, or the impossibility of, purchasing a new median home, health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. It's all money. Right. And that's why in Missouri, I get so frustrated, I'm a nerd with the numbers. When you look at the elimination of all these taxes and it's making them all cheer and rah, and they want to put flags on their cars, for such, they're already not paying tax. Like, there's no more, what are you going to get back? Yeah. You're already in an effective rate that's sub 10.
That's one solution. Like, okay, this should be a state but there are other states that are actually entertaining this. Like, because they have the same fertility challenges that Missouri has, but they're like, okay, how do we help the young parents reduce the economic cost? The second would be like tax credits. And it is revolutionary. We're behind where Europe is on this idea. But the idea that in today's environment, when you have 2 working partners and one has to quit working, you probably need to have some type of tax credits to supplement that partner that stays home with the child. This is not 1940. We're in a different economy now.
Yeah.
And so there are some states that are starting to entertain tax credits for children who are born.
So along those lines, let me ask you just another one of those zoom out questions. When we look at the other 50 states as a whole, what you're describing is something, these return some of this power back to the states so that states can make these decisions and try to figure it out. Because you pointed out, like, why Orlando grew because it had tourism, and Austin grew because it had...
in Puerto Rico.
Oh, yeah. Yes. There's that too, but they don't want to talk about that. And I think about, like, that you mess around and find out moment, right? When all these people that are all about states' rights and get the money back and give it back to the states. The numbers don't lie. Like, the federal dollars that they're talking about sending back to the states, those that are coming from, even Missouri, we're not a contributor.
Yeah. So we will. So we live in an urban environment, and so we will probably be okay. Mm-hmm. If you live outside of the St. Louis metro or the Kansas City metro, I would be concerned. I would be concerned that the quality of education is going to go down. Just based on the numbers that I've seen that will come back. And then what happens, and it's happening, people in these small towns tend to move to bigger towns because the quality of life is not the same that it was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And so one thing that when I always travel, I travel with the demographer's hat. And it's a curse because I can't really enjoy life. But my son was in the robotics team, and he always had tournaments in the south part by Festus and clear down there. So I would spend a day down there, and I would just go to the town center, and I would count how many baby carriages do I see versus how many old people do I see with the cane. And I started to realize, like, there are no babies. There are very few children down there. And I saw a lot of angry people who were elderly, who saw declining services. And I come back and I look up the data. I'm like, yeah, this county's dying. And I would be angry too if it's not flourishing. And so this is what's happening across Missouri. It's happening very close to us.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the counties here have more people dying than are born, except St. Charles in the city, and that's about to end in 5 years. Every county in our region will have more people dying than are born. And so I tell people, it's like, it's just beginning. So think of a storm, and you can feel the small drops hitting you.
You smell it coming.
That's what's happening. The real storm will happen in 2040, 2045, and you're not going to get out of it. It's too late. I have to redo my models, but the model last year, it's going to be worse because the decline is steeper this year. But based on last year's birth and deaths, in 2040, the natural decline was 12,000 in 2040 every year. Over a 10-year period, that's 120,000 residents. The region will decline by 120,000 residents from 40 to 50.
So, okay.
And so what does that mean? If you're trying to hire construction workers, good luck. Hire plumbers, good luck. If you go to, I tell people, your fast food experience is going to be gone because most of those fast food restaurants will not have enough workers to stay open.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's coming. Going to Lowe's and Home Depot, you'll have a line to get out because you're not going to have enough workers at the front end.
You have lower inventory. You'll have, because there's a domino effect of supply chain.
That's the choice you can choose when you say, I want to stay the way we've always stayed. There's another path, one St. Louis, that says you don't have to have that 120,000 decline, but it's going to require some changes. It's going to require some municipalities, small ones, to merge. It's going to require unification, and it's going to require an attitude that St. Louis City is the premier city of the region, and we're going to back it, and we're going to make sure it's great.
Why is it so hard for people outside of the city? You know, I don't want to paint a political brush on them, but we hear it. You hear the same narratives that I hear in public and in socials, etc. Why is this so hard for people in the county and beyond to understand that if you do not have this a thriving city, you really do not have a metro that matters? You know, it's almost as if people vindictively are kind of encouraging and watching in real time this reality TV show, hoping that population number goes to 250. See, we told you so, right?
Yeah, but their population will be declining too.
I know. So. Well, they're not looking in the mirror. We can go way off track there.
Something that I find interesting because I've lived in the city, I've lived in St. Charles, and now I live in Chesterfield. I've never lived in a region that's this provincial. Never. In Chicago, San Francisco, D.C., it had territory, but there was never this provincialism.
Yeah, there were neighborhoods. There was vibes, but it was still kind of they were all metros.
They wanted people to. Living in Chicago. I was a professor at Northwestern. I never met anybody that wanted Chicago to fail.
No.
never met anybody that said, I want to see Chicago fail.
Plenty of people that want the Cubs to lose or that want the Sox to
Yeah.
lose, but that's different.
Yeah.
They're all Chicagoans.
But here, I see it on a weekly basis on social media. And I saw it yesterday to all the haters out there. I was like, oh man, it's going to start, right? And I'm like, this is not the way to think about this.
Well, so let's talk about St. Louis in particular. We've got a big election coming up, and I'm not going to ask you to endorse anybody. I would never do that. But I've listened to the two candidates, and I'm really thinking of it in terms of through the lens of what you've been laying out here, just demographics and basic services, and both of them have been leaning heavy into, well, I'm going to pick up trash more efficiently, and I'm going to fill potholes. A lot of it is just this kind of X's and O's service talk.
Yep.
I have not heard from either one of them kind of a brand strategy, a growth strategy that is resonating. There's been allusions to, well, we're going to bring in more jobs. Okay, where? What kind of industry, et cetera. On Kara Spencer's side, there is the, obviously the Bob Clark effect on her campaign, in his role as a builder, as a developer, as a big, quote, business guy. So it kind of leans towards, even if it is nefarious, growth is growth is growth. This is how I view it. Jobs are jobs. Not hearing a lot of that from the Tashara camp. As you look at this race, and coming out of this last population decline and looking at things nationally, and we're starting to talk about what's going on in the Missouri legislature and the potential of eliminating a lot of the revenue that we need. How critical is this race over the next 4 years and its effect on the following 5 to 10?
I wrote an article in the Mound Messenger.
Okay.
About this issue because after the primary, I received demographic requests weekly, and I have a pretty good sense of what people are interested in and questions that are being talked about in the community based on questions that I get. Like, can you provide objective data? But after the primary, I got my fair share of questions about the racial composition of the city, because the St. Louis city, of all of the cities in the United States, is fundamentally changing in ways that other cities are not. It was a black majority city. It is 49% of the households now are white. It'll become a white majority city. And so the question that came from a lot of people, because they saw the race with Donna Behringer and Darlene,
Yes.
how close that race was. And people finally started to say, we're going to have three white people on the board.
Yep.
And this will be a historic, wherever you're at, that the black voice is no longer represented there. Because Darlene was always there, and then you had Tashara now. But it is possible that you're going to have 3 white people now sitting on the board. And this part of this article I wrote was, and I've been talking, the St. Louis was changing. We should have addressed it when we talked about this, but nobody, what do you want to do? You got to talk about St. Louis public schools.
Yep.
You got to talk about housing. You got to talk about crime. About 90 families leave the city every month. Most of those are black families now.
Yeah.
And that is going to change the political calculus of who gets elected. I don't know who's going to get elected, but it is very possible that you have 86,000 black adults now in the city that are left. The white population did not leave.
Why do you?
And so,
I mean,
the white adults are not leaving the city. It's the black families who are leaving.
Yeah, well, Francis Park in South City, and the comparing and contrasting the two, crime for one is still high, but on a percentage basis, significantly lower per person. But it's schools. You know, it's the people that I know that have kids that were living in North City that have even recently left. They're in Florissant now. They're they're in
Hazelwood.
Hazelwood. They've jumped up, and they're getting a little bit more space for proportionate
And they're
increase
trying
in
to get
rent.
out to Olivet. They're moving out to Chesterfield and Baldwin. I have a map. I'll send it to you.
So why? I understand from a political standpoint why they've both been, pardon the pun, but white bread in their policy, addresses regarding the race. Would it behoove them to just come out and say, look, we're screwed right now? And because we're not hearing big ideas. And some of the people that are in their camps are not really espousing concepts either. And it takes me back to last year, and it would boil my brain on the national level when I would hear, the Republican camp say, oh, well, there's concepts of plans.
Yeah.
We're not hearing anything, though.
So part of what I wanted to talk about, so we have a mayor's election in Chesterfield as well. Nobody cares about the mayor in Chesterfield. Everybody's attention is on the city because of the importance of the city.
Yeah.
So even though it's declining, hundreds of thousands of dollars are being spent because of the importance of that position in the city. So the city is still important. Chesterfield, yeah, it's important, but it's not that important.
Well, don't you find it ironic, the people that want to really be haters on the city for a multitude of reasons, they just assume everybody is a flaming left progressive, or, there's fundamental just racist tendencies that emanate out in the police control takeover issue. It just seems so counter to self-representation, your own people, it's your own police force.
So it's interesting.
But here's where I'm going with this. I want to see if, to your point, nobody in Chesterfield cares about the mayoral race there other than the mayor and maybe his opponent. Everybody cares about the city mayor race. That police activation that Keogh and Moleg pushed through for state control of local police, by default, isn't that an acknowledgement that you are our crown jewel?
Yeah.
How did you view that whole process? Where were you on that?
It is. I think I've talked to enough groups that have basically said St. Louis City is the premier city of the region.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're in Clayton or Chesterfield or St. Charles.
Or Defiance.
Yeah. St. Louis City is still the premier city of the region. So there is gold here in the city.
Mm-hmm.
This is still a city that can succeed. And so this is why in Chesterfield, the discussion is about the mayor's election in the city and not the mayor's election in Chesterfield.
So within your burb or your block or your maybe your parent groups, et cetera, did the conversation ever come up about the police control? What was just kind of
so I think
the optics?
People believe, so they do talk about this. I talk to police officers who have left the city, who live out there,
mm-hmm.
they're not coming back. These police officers are not coming back into the city, even under state control. They're done. I think the issue is it was a promise that the governor made as part of his campaign, and
well, he's a city guy too.
Yeah. So I think that's part. I don't think. So I work a lot with crime data, and I've said this over and over. I have an article in the Business Journal about the issue. If nothing fundamentally changes with the transparency under state control,
mm-hmm.
not really does make a difference, whether it's state or local. I believe in local control. I believe in subsidiarity, that decisions should be made at the local level. That's just part of how I view decision making. That should be done at the lowest possible level.
Well, that's how they feel about schools and healthcare and everything else. They just don't feel that way about police forces.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to turn around. I looked at the workforce numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that there are enough police officers on the sidelines in today's environment to find 400 police officers to come back into the city of St. Louis unless you start offering Ladue type salaries.
And Ladue levels of crime. Yeah. All right, let's go glass half full here for the closeout. Now that we've determined that we're all dying faster than we're birthing, and let's give you the keys to the castle a little bit. Let's give you access to a little bit of Rams money, however you want to view it. Because obviously you live in the data, you see maybe cracks in the negative armor that you can expose to create, opportunity or improvements. What would you focus on? Is it education? Is it housing? And instead of just going generically with, we need to reduce crime, like what are some ideas that you think would work here now?
So in the city, you have to reimagine St. Louis public schools. It is, this should not be a surprise to anybody, but St. Louis City as public schools leads the country in under enrollment. It has, and I'll give you one example. So Fort Worth, Texas, a growing city, they are growing. They're in the planning process to close schools because they can see the trends in 2040. So they're getting ahead of the curve and they're closing schools.
So it's a growing economy, growing populace, but the birth rate is so low relative to
that they won't need these schools in 2040. So they're already starting to consolidate and close.
Okay.
We cannot have that discussion here. We have to have that discussion. We have about 30 schools that need to close. We probably need to close 50 schools.
Within are we talking region?
No,
or
the city of St. Louis.
Okay.
And then you have to build some schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying you just close them. You have to build some schools in the areas where you have population growth. It's a reimagining of what St. Louis public schools needs to look like. You close schools and you're going to have to invest and build in new schools, new infrastructure, new technology, fiber optics.
Yeah, because the overhead alone. I mean, we used to be approached to come and buy those buildings to make them the cool new lofts, and like they're aging. Yeah. The buildings are decrepit.
So that's the first part. Where if you gave me a wand, I would close about 50 schools. I would probably build 15 new schools of where population's coming to. The second is if I was king for a day, I would build housing at scale. And this would have to eliminate some permit processing in the city, but you need to build at scale like 1,000, 2,000 units, single family homes.
So, okay.
And that's like at a minimum, it has to happen annually.
So you're advising the new mayor, whoever that might be, speak for a second about the role of permitting and what they need to get rid of, because the process, it's such a stumbling block. Even if you're in the city, even if it's what you do every single day, the process is not easy. How critical is that to not only make it easier within the city for people to do more within the city?
So I think what developers have told me is just the time it takes to get the permits approved. It's time is money. And so, some of the stories they've told me are like unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
To get some stuff, like just for infill housing, let alone large scale 500, 600 type, and it can happen. I see some projects happening, but there is a lot of vacant land just north of us.
Yeah.
That has to be redeveloped at scale. And then I think you have to, we didn't talk about this, but you have to kind of rethink SLDC's mission in today's economy.
Yeah.
I understand the purpose of why it was created. I question its purpose today and its role today, and maybe it needs to come back into city government under the direct control of the mayor.
Okay, now that we solved all those problems.
At the regional level, I do work with...
That's a big one.
I do work with people, like we need to be in Dallas, we need to be in Houston, we need to be in Miami. and actively recruiting people to come to St. Louis to create businesses. And so people are doing this now. They are traveling to Dallas and Houston to promote the region. But we cannot take a laissez-faire attitude.
Okay.
We've done that for 50 years, and look where it got us.
So, last question. Competitive advantage. As it pertains to us versus, I don't want to say Dallas or some of these other cities in which you're referencing that, we need to take best practices. Let's look in this 5-hour circle, the Indianapolis, the Memphis, Nashville.
Minneapolis.
Minneapolis.
That's a good comparison because I just have this discussion all the time. Minneapolis was smaller than St. Louis in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 700, 800,000 residents larger today. And so we talk, why do people want to go to Minneapolis? It's cold. It's in the middle of nowhere.
I was going to say, it's not the weather.
But it's growing.
Yeah.
And so we should be larger than Minneapolis. We should be 4.2 million residents based on how large we were in 1970. So we have to change the attitude that growth is bad. Growth, I got caught in a traffic jam today. I added 2 minutes to my commute. Traffic is not a bad thing.
No.
If I have to add 8 minutes to my commute and we're growing, there are more businesses, more jobs, that's okay. That's what a vibrant city's like. It's got traffic. Then you build a reliable light rail
Public
system.
transportation. It's when people talk about traffic around here, I just laugh because having spent 9 years in Chicago, going up the the Dan Ryan and the the Eisenhower especially.
I used to live in Chicago, and so my wife had a 9-mile commute. On a good day, it would take her 45 minutes.
Was she going to Schaumburg?
She was going to Belmont Avenue. So we lived in Rogers Park on the lake.
Yeah.
So you had to go cross town and on Belmont Avenue and Harlem.
Oh, I know exactly where that's at.
And there were no interstates. It was through the city. And good day, 45, 50 minutes, typically an hour. And then we came to St. Louis and and people were like, oh, don't worry about the traffic. And we're like, are you sure there's traffic? There's no traffic.
I think traffic was the ultimate stimulus for the growth of podcasts. Because you have 45 minutes, no matter where, if you're in a big city, you got 45 minutes to an hour each way to sit.
And then when we moved out to St. Charles, I'm like, oh yeah, that's where the traffic is. But I'm saying, even then, that's not San Francisco traffic.
So last question. Again, I want to go back to competitive advantage. Maybe the cultural advantages, maybe the pop advantages. I always argue when I travel around for soccer or business or whatever, when I talk to locals, our food scene is the best, right? If we have something to hang our hat on, I'm gonna start with our food scene, number one. I do love the neighborhoods. It's got a very Chicago vibe. There's from Morgan Ford to South, Soulard, et cetera. Chicago is the closest comparison. What do you like about St. Louis as far as something that can be advertised to start that cultural brain spin as far as somebody potentially being interested, not to move here, but maybe just let's start with visit here.
Yes, I'm going to speak personally because I get offers from other universities to leave from the private sector, to go into the private sector. But we decided to stay here because I think this is a great place to raise a family and to live. And we don't talk about it a lot, but we have access to water around our region. And that water is important. And so you're going to see people leaving Phoenix in 30, 40 years because there's not going to be enough water there. They're going to be coming back to places like St. Louis and Cincinnati and Cleveland because we have abundant water. We have good water.
River sources everywhere.
So this is our leverage, is that we have to hold on to this water because there are plans in place to pipe our water out to the Southwest.
So is that maybe our hidden commodity?
Oh, yeah.
Orlando had, Walt Disney and Universal Studio. We have water.
We have water because you need water to live. Yeah, and so
that's pretty important.
They put a housing stop in Arizona because they know that they're going to run out of water. So that's one thing. We have access to, and I have a video on this. I'm a hiker, and I enjoy going out and hiking. We have some of the best outdoor adventures
Totally.
you can find. I mean, I live in Chesterfield. Within 15 minutes, I'm in Babler State Park.
Yeah.
You could not do this in Chicago. You could not drive 15 minutes and be in a forest.
No, the only thing you can go to the lake and you can go up and down the lake shore, but that's it.
That's it. But you're not getting into the forest.
No.
Get lost.
No.
And so we have this, and somebody pointed this out from Great. I have to give them credit. Gateway Greenway.
Great. Greenway. Great. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Gateway Greenway. Yeah.
We have 2 REI stores here, and so that shows you in most cities if they'll be lucky if they have 1.
Yeah.
Or they don't have, but we have 2, and they're doing great because we have a younger population. That's an outdoor population.
Funny you say that because I always wondered, I never thought of it that way, but like, why in the hell do we have an alpine shop in Kirkwood?
And in Chesterfield, we have another one in Chesterfield.
Yeah, like there's no mountains, but it's that mindset. It's the consumer. It's the kind of people.
They get out to the hiking areas, and you see one thing. I'm out there all the time. They're packed.
Yeah.
People are out there hiking. They're out there running. So this is something we don't advertise as our region as the natural capital. I would say we have far more trees than Chicago does, and so we should take advantage of this capital and market it. And we're a 25-minute city, so anywhere where you live, you can get anywhere within 25 minutes, regardless of the traffic. This is not happening in Chicago, San Francisco. What I do on a weekend with my children, I could never do in Chicago.
No, I always think of, it's funny you say that because living in Webster, we are literally 8 minutes from everywhere, right? And I always think of George Clooney and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? You know, the Odyssey.
Yeah.
Like, well, you're 2 weeks from everywhere, right? And that's kind of how St. Louis is. Whatever you want to do, you can do it. And there's not a barrier to entry.
Yeah.
Professor, this was fun. This was a lot of fun for me. I kind of nerding into the demographic numbers, because I live more in the sniff test world, like that's not working or that's too hard. And you're like, nope, this is what we're seeing. So it's tremendous information. And I'll be sure to put the link to your pages and the data and all that in the show notes. But thank you for joining me. I've had a lot of fun and, I hope you don't leave,
Right.
That's good data for the state of Missouri and St. Louis.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you for listening, people. Like, review, follow, share. Tell me you're joking. We'll be back next time. We're out of here with a little more War. Kind of an oxymoron. War the band with Why Can't We Be Friends? We'll catch you next time.